After months of work, I recently published the last update for Coldfront, finally marking it as a completed project. Now that it's in its final state, I've had a lot of time to observe playthroughs in a more natural environment. While playtests are paramount to making a good project, they tend to be a bit more clinical and artificial, since playtesters know that they're being watched and evaluated. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, since it still provides really useful insight into the designs of your map, but it does still influence how playtesters will go about their playthroughs. On the other hand, after a custom campaign is released to the public, people will play it far more leisurely, without the sensation of being observed, or having to fulfill expectations. This provides two things: a more refined insight into how the average player will experience your map, and second-hand embarrassment that will keep you awake at night. Authentic reactions. Coldfront is no exception to this. In fact, I noticed a few things that I found rather interesting and wanted to talk about. Unlike some of my other videos, this one is more so just me rambling about small things I noticed, but it could still provide interesting information for anyone else working on a campaign, and I invite everyone to further discuss any of these points in the comments below. So without any further ado, I'll just get right into it. One of the first things I designed for Coldfront was a new system for the alarmed cars, which simplified their logic and allowed them to emit proper lights when activated. This is a pretty strong contrast to the base game, where they only show headlight beams and some sprites, but no actual lights. Almost nobody noticed this. Of course, there is the fact that most people aren't going to shoot any of the alarmed cars in the first place, especially since most of the ones in Coldfront are randomized to not always spawn. But to still show off this new design, I implemented a guaranteed alarm car in the event of the second map. But yes, this is a scripted event, so it's understandable that players might think this is just a one-time gimmick. However, looking at the times where players did shoot alarm cars outside of that event, I've yet to see someone actually point out that it has functional lights. This is one thing that I really do not understand. For all the other things I want to mention, I can figure out some sort of logical reasoning behind why they go unnoticed. But the alarm cars are such a huge difference that I genuinely don't know why it seems to go unnoticed. In fact, I actually expected that it would be a focal point of attention, since to my knowledge it's never been done before. I even thought that maybe lots of people did notice it, and they just don't tend to comment on it for some unknown reason. But even when I directly pointed it out to some people, they still expressed surprise, as if the car alarms had always done this. It's such a weird phenomenon, and I'd love to hear what other people think about this. Speaking of cars, here's another detail that was very commonly overlooked. Did you notice it? Yeah, that car actually has a running engine. It's not just the cars either. The trucks, vans, and even generators that have their lights on all have an audible sound since they're, well, actually running. Given how noisy the gameplay tends to be, I can understand why this is easy to overlook. But it's a detail I'm proud of, so I'm telling you about it anyway. Something else that sticks out to me like a sore thumb, but seemingly went unnoticed by players, is the detail on the Snowpile models. Given that the campaign is set in a snowy location, it makes sense that everything is covered in snow, including cars, crates, and the likes. But due to currently unknown issues, some of the Snowpiles have pretty bad lighting. Fucking shit, why are you so bad, you ancient piece of shit program? Why do I do this to myself? I hate you so much, please just work, oh my god. To briefly elaborate, there's two ways that models receive lighting in the source engine: vertex lighting and origin lighting. Don't worry, the difference isn't complicated. Origin lighting is very basic. The game just checks what the light is like at the center of the model, and then applies that to the entire model. Vertex lighting is more refined. It checks each part of the model and applies more detailed lighting and shadows onto it, though the precision of this will be different depending on how exactly a model is set up. Now, for some reason, the Snowpiles all forcibly use origin lighting, and I'm unable to change this for some unknown reason. So while some of them look fine, others look pretty ugly. However, nobody seems to have taken note of this, or at least nobody thought it was worth reporting, which is interesting to me, because as the level designer of the campaign, these little imperfections really stand out. The next point that I noticed is that players are far more understanding of technical limitations than one would assume. It's common to see people complain about a design or a game not being good enough, despite the critics not actually having the slightest clue how it is implemented or how to even change it. But the Snowstorm's simplicity had a lot of understanding from those who did point it out. Up until the current version of Coldfront, the Snowstorm was achieved by simply decreasing the fog's distance. But since this ended up obscuring the actual snowfall particles, it looked very basic. Unfortunately, this is just a limitation of what the engine is capable of, but players seem to intuitively assume this, and they were willing to look over that limitation despite not knowing about any of the technical reasonings behind it. Of course, now the Snowstorm looks far better thanks to the custom particles provided by my local raccoon. But even with the old Storm design, players still appreciated it, despite the simpler implementation. Speaking of the Storm, I'm also surprised that so few people noticed that it hides the outline glows. Unlike Hard Rain, where you can still see all the glows like you usually would, the Snowstorm temporarily disables them. Unless something bad happens, like a teammate getting pinned or vomited on, players don't tend to realize that the outline glows are gone in the first place. This isn't even a bad thing. It's actually pretty funny. The element of surprise when players realize it makes for some really great moments. It's just surprising to me that it's not immediately noticed, given how important the outline glows are. Or maybe they just don't care about their teammates. After all, this is survival of the fittest. Hashtag Nick Grindset, hashtag don't slow me down, hashtag get good. Now, I want to talk a bit more about level design. If you've been in online spaces for a while, you've probably seen people get upset about yellow paint. And it makes sense. Players don't enjoy being treated like an idiot, but at the same time, players also don't like being lost or clueless about what to do next. The usual solution to this, to put it bluntly, is to treat the player like an idiot without making them feel like an idiot. For Left 4 Dead specifically, that usually involves making the intended path forwards as obvious as possible, without crossing the boundary into overtly hand-holding the player. There's a whole psychology behind this, but even without any specialized knowledge, you can identify when a game is doing just that. Most people already know that lights are often used to show the player where to go, but there's also other methods, such as color design, sound, shadows, animations, or framing. In fact, Left 4 Dead even has its own yellow paint, since the huge glowing arrows spray painted throughout the levels serve the exact same purpose. Even when you think the path is obvious and there's nowhere else to go, there's still some arrows pointing you in the right way. But due to the way these arrows are stylized, they fit perfectly within the game's world, so it doesn't stand out to the player that they're being handheld through the level. If the arrows were instead flat pictograms, it would still be the exact same concept, but it would also make the player feel that the game is outright treating them like an idiot. So essentially what I'm saying is that you need to guide the player in a way that's as obvious as possible, without actually making the player realize that they're being guided. Anyone making a custom campaign has to account for this, and Coldfront is no exception. Even some situations where I believed that it was impossible to get lost still resulted in some players getting lost. The fourth map is a pretty good example of this. After accessing this rooftop, I framed the path forwards using lots of different things. There's a nearby light to grab your attention. There's another light right next to an arrow that's pointing in the intended direction. There's a bunch of supplies right next to it. There's a ladder to subconsciously convey the idea of climbing. There's crates and a vent neatly arranged to be perfectly climbable, with a flare and more supplies to highlight this path even further. There's a distant fire showing the end goal, and the survivors outright say to climb over the train car.
Up here!
We can cross over up here.
There's no way anyone can miss this, right? Wrong. Some people saw this hatch on the ground and opted to explore the area below, causing them to get lost. So I modified the hatch to start closed when approaching from the rooftop, since I didn't want to remove the dynamic path that sometimes leads through the garages instead. However, even when players realize where they're supposed to go, the exact way they go about this could vary quite a lot. On more than one occasion, I saw someone trying to jump this gap instead of walking across the conveniently placed train car right next to them. Of course, this isn't really the player's fault, but it does highlight why some games may opt to use yellow paint. It's quite difficult to design a level in a way that every single aspect of it is intuitive for every potential player, without overstepping that boundary of making the player feel stupid. In a similar vein, I noticed that players would occasionally get lost in the finale. When getting the APC ending, the player is supposed to run across the bridge in order to escape, but this is not really obvious. Now, I can explain exactly why. There's two reasons for it. First, the area is large and not linear, since it had to be designed in a way that also accommodates a holdout finale. Second, the rescue vehicle is obscured by fog. This is an unfortunate limitation of the game's age, since increasing the fog distance will render too much of the map at once and cause the game to crack. Come on, you piece of shit. Damn it. Piece of shit. Yeah, good, yeah, nice. Alright, perfect, we're back. So, as I was saying, my solutions to these issues were to implement a directional honking sound from the APC, intending for it to guide the player, as well as a bright flare that gets shot up with a loud bang and emits light from the location the player is supposed to head towards. My intention with these designs is that the flare lights up the entire area in a bright red color, which catches the player's attention, then the distant glow of the falling flare shows them the general direction they should move towards, while the APC continuously honks its horn to remind the player that they are in fact going the right way. Seems pretty foolproof, right? Wrong! Some players would still get lost, or think that they missed the escape vehicle, or simply not realize that they need to cross the bridge in the first place. So, in the latest update, I just opted to make the APC glow until the player gets close, which should hopefully make it impossible to miss. Speaking of the APC glowing, originally, it didn't have this glowing floor when you got close. You would think that it's pointless to highlight the fact that you're supposed to get inside of the rescue vehicle, but multiple playtests showed that this is not actually obvious. Players often ended up standing around outside of the APC, thinking that they only had to be within the general area to trigger the escape. Some even expressed confusion as to why the campaign wasn't ending, and assumed that this part was simply unfinished at the time. I can see why that might be an impression, but I ended up highlighting the inside of the APC just to make sure that it's unmistakable where to go. In fact, just making something glow is not always enough. The event in Map 3 sees a player protecting Mike, an NPC, while he opens the gate to leave the warehouse. This event is started by interacting with the security desk when Mike is standing next to it, indicated by the fact it is, well, glowing. Yet, every so often, I notice players standing around for a while, not realizing that they need to interact with it. An optimal solution to this would have been to add a voice line for Mike, where he says something like, "Let me know when you're ready." But since players do eventually figure out that they actually need to stop the event, it's not really a big deal. Though, I did also notice that players don't really pay attention to voice lines in general. The source engine is already pretty terrible at handling sounds. A sound file might be horribly loud for one player, and barely audible for another player, for absolutely no discernible reason whatsoever. But ignoring the source engine jank, I noticed that players tend to listen to voice lines as if they were ambience, rather than information. One such example is when meeting Mike, where he tells the player about unlocking the gate to leave the warehouse. It's not uncommon to see players listen to those voice lines and then shortly afterwards get confused about what they're supposed to be doing. It's kind of funny, but it's not really an issue since it doesn't get in the way of the gameplay. After all, there is only one way forwards. Likewise, in the finale, the soldiers on the radio outright tell the player that they have 5 minutes to escape, and that the bridge demolition will not wait any longer than that. Yet, I've still seen various players express surprise about the bridge being blown up in their face if they took too long. This has a reasonable explanation though. In the official campaigns, voice lines are typically nothing but flavor text. The parish finale also has a supposed time limit, but this is not an actual mechanic. Whether you cross the bridge in 3 minutes or 3 hours makes no difference. The voice lines are purely there to convey a sense of urgency and add to the world building. I believe that this ambientification of the voice lines is due to the official campaigns setting the standard of what to expect from a workshop campaign. Since the voice lines in Valve's maps are just a background detail that can be safely ignored, players will get used to that and automatically set that as their expectation for every campaign. This brings up an interesting question though. If a voice line directly telling the player is not always enough to convey information, how do you reliably inform the player? You could maybe use a game instructor tooltip, but not everyone has that enabled. You could display an obvious message, but that breaks immersion. So is there even a reliable way to ensure that every single player has the information they need? Anyways, that's all I wanted to talk about. I hope this was interesting, and I again invite everyone to share their thoughts in the comments below. Likewise, if you have any interesting experiences from playing the campaign yourself, feel free to tell me about them. I'm also working on another project right now, so the better I understand the player, the better I can make my future campaigns. Well, that's it for this video. Hopefully my rambling was entertaining. With all that being said, thank you very much for watching, and have a great night.